Hello and welcome to our VAC Roundtable number 99. Let's see, let's get it going on the stream here. Boom. All right. So we're basically, as we're here, we're basically back with a friendly who we've had conversations in the past. Our friend Justin Strekal is joining us again. And he had previously he was with the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, but that has changed. He stepped aside to run for office, but that necessarily didn't come out the way that he intended. So that is life. But at the same time, we still appreciate you greatly. So everybody, please welcome the one, the only Justin Strekal.
Well, hello, hello. Thank you, thank you. I'm actually not the one and only. I do have a cousin named Justin Strekal. But no, I'm really, really excited just to be back and talk. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and just kind of, if my brain is a sponge, there's still some hopefully worthwhile things to be squeezed out of it, and we can discuss it tonight.
Well, that's why we had you back, is because we want to squeeze the brain some more. So we usually start off with one particular question, but you've already answered that in the previous discussion. So we're just going to jump right into this. You helped draft the first marijuana reform legislation introduced in the Virginia Senate. Looking back, what lessons from that early legislative effort might apply to any federal reform happening today?
That is a great question, and I like it because I fell backwards into cannabis policy efforts. It was not a political or a career ambition of mine. It was an issue that I really supported personally because I enjoy consuming marijuana, and in my younger days, I sold some marijuana as in order to help save some money to be able
Can't
to
hear you.
do unpaid political internships. Oh, you can't hear me?
I
No,
lost your audio.
Oh, okay, cool.
we can hear you just fine, Doc. That's on you, sir. You're gonna have to check your audio. Go ahead, Justin.
So when I was working for state senator Adam Ebbin, he actually just got appointed to be the governor's special person in the Virginia, whatever they call their cannabis control board. I don't remember the exact acronym. He had pledged to the local NORML chapter that as a state senator, he would be pushing medical cannabis programs and full decriminalization, and really let the advocates who were on the ground and built the relationships with him tell him what they wanted. And so it was my job as the legislative aide hear from the advocates on the ground and turn that into became the first ever comprehensive decriminalization effort introduced in the Commonwealth. And we asked for everything, right? We were asking to fully remove civil penalties, things like that, like fully decriminalize, which years later we would look at and call the Vermont model of legalization, where we would basically legalize the personal possession and personal home cultivation of cannabis. And I remember, I was a legislative aide, and the Democrats were in the minority, and I would go, and every week I would go sit outside of the Republican chair of the committee, the Courts of Justice Committee. His name was Tommy Norman, and he was he had this Southern politician's drawl. And every week, I would show up and ask him, can our bill get a hearing this week? Can our bill be considered in committee this week? And like clockwork, he had a different way to respond to me, as if it was like marijuana jargon boggle, right? Where he would come up, he's like, "Well, Justin, I just don't know if the Commonwealth of Virginia is ready for that sweet Maui Wowie." And I was like, "Okay, Tommy Norman, but like we need to have this conversation." And and that was working with the tenacious individuals who showed up to support local lobby days efforts by local cannabis reform groups, and just interested individuals sending in correspondence. We got a hearing. Um, we didn't get our decriminalization effort done, but the conversation, because we were having the conversation, because people forced the legislature to have the conversation, and I was proud to be their tool in helping them get that done. We did start the process to at least, and then 12 months later, it resulted so that way you were no longer automatically losing your driver's license for a drug possession charge. Where if you got, if you got caught with a joint in your backyard, you would automatically lose your driver's license under the law at the time. So it's you got to force that conversation as citizens, right? We don't have, the citizens don't employ a lot of lobbyists, right? So we have to force those conversations. And I learned so much from, having that first, policy position that I had inside of government, from on what it feels like to getting that pressure. And I learned a lot that helped me in my time working at NORML and later when I started my own political action committee for a few years too. So I think there's a lot to learn. The little bit specific to the question, like how it can be effective and how that can be helpful in other places. Like, here now I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and we just saw SB 56, which is actually rolling back a lot of the protections that have been recently passed. And I'm not involved with local efforts here in Ohio, but there I know that there was a lot of opposition, but the requirements to try and do a people's veto were so high that supporters weren't able to gather enough signatures. So I think finding key legislators, who are the appropriate committees of jurisdiction and their chairs. You guys all know this, but maybe some of the people watching don't know. But like, knowing which committees your bills have to go through and just keeping that drumbeat alive. Because if we just introduced the bill and I showed up once, we wouldn't have gotten real consideration. We wouldn't have gotten things done. And it took that like failed conversation after failed conversation after failed conversation after failed conversation and not taking offense to it, but with dogged persistence, just keep beating that drum. And eventually they have to hear you. At least that's the theory here in democracy.
Well, you do it long enough. I mean, things do happen. I mean, the first marijuana initiative didn't win, right? It took many before, yeah, you have to build momentum, and people sometimes forget that. They think that, or as we see with Kevin Sabet, he just thinks he can put up an initiative and think it's automatically going to win. And he found out mighty quickly on the realities that come with that. So it's its own set of challenges. All right. Well, again, thank you for being here today. Our next question will come from Councilmember Michael Crowitz. So take it away, Councilmember.
Council member.
Thank you. It's good to see you, man. It's been too long.
Yeah.
Um, so the question is, with your background managing political campaigns, how much does electoral pressure actually move cannabis policy? And what should advocates be paying attention to in upcoming election cycles? I mean, there's a lot of noise, right? Help us cut through. What is the key indicators for us?
The that's a really good question. And the most powerful and limited resource in our political system is attention. And that we talk a lot about, the money in politics, and 96% of Americans agree that, we got to get big money out of politics, and people on the left and the people on the right have different ideas, and I think there's this broad like malaise about elections, and it just being all about money because it is a lot about money. um, but I think with candidates, particularly for smaller races, we're talking about Senate races. It's profoundly difficult to get face time with a candidate who's running for U.S. Senate, but for local races, the ability to build a relationship, a meaningful relationship with candidates for office. Everyone's token up. There you go. So like, the ability to build those relationships, the barriers are pretty low. And as I described in my last answer about Virginia, it was because Adam Evan was running for Congress, and somebody at Normal was like, "Hey, this guy's voted well, like the right way once on one issue a couple of years ago. Let's go talk to him. Let's talk about engaging with this campaign." And they showed up with like three volunteers a couple of different times throughout the course of the campaign. And that attention, that support, that relatively minor but meaningful support of making sure a couple hundred doors got knocked and the candidate really felt supported by the community, meant that when it came time to write the bill, he handed them the pen and said, "What should we write?" Um, so I think it's the marijuana advocacy space. I know, and all of you know very well, that there's not a lot of money, right? There might be money on the industry side, and there used to be a better harmony, and there's a hole there that we could explore, but there's not a harmony right now. You don't see, a big bridging of the gap and meaningful deliverables from industry money supporting advocacy in a way that I wish we saw. But just if you guys got members all around the country, and if you could have, members showing up to down ballot races, people who run for state house might run for Congress down the road, and you never know how those ripple effects really build effects. So just yeah, building relationships, showing up. If you show up to a political event, you are 1,000% more engaged than the average citizen, and you can get noticed as long as you show up and try and get things done.
And show up consistently, right? It's not
Yes,
just show up
yes.
once. It's about consistently being there because that's how, I think the momentum was built in Virginia, right? It was having, Lennis Worth and others there laying that groundwork, Michael Crowitz and others
Yep.
that had, really helped pave the way that it really is about building momentum and, as you say, sending things upstream, sending people upstream, sending great people upstream, right?
Yeah.
That's its own set of challenges. All right. Well, next up will be Council Member Doc Lang. So, Doc, you're up.
Glad to meet you, Justin.
Hey, I'm
Okay,
really excited.
here's the question. What information or structure is usually missing between local advocates and national organizations?
Time, time, time is what is missing, and this was something that I found really frustrating when I was at Normal, and one of the reasons that led to my departure of Normal was the way that the staff were treated. I departed after an unsuccessful attempt to unionize the shop as a result of how some of my colleagues were treated, um, and illegally classified as gig workers. Um, they that building relational solidarity for organizing takes time. It takes intentionality, and volunteers are amazing. People who are passionate for the movement are amazing. But finding, you can't be expected to have supporters in Washington, D.C. work in the halls on the appropriations process or navigating a committee structure or a rulemaking issue on a regular basis. People burn out, right? People got to pay their rent, their mortgages, or whatever. So I think that in this era where we kind of have, no shade to my friends who are still in DC as the two paid advocates still left there, but it's an impossible task, and I think expectations management is really frustrating, and I think it's one of the reasons why so many people are disillusioned, not just in cannabis but on everything, right? Because we're so primed to, organizations want to put out saying that like they're doing great, they're responsible for this, they got this done, they're the organization fighting for that. And it makes it so hard to have thoughtful expectations management, and build more constructive solidarity through organizing to get things done for long-term efforts. I wish so badly. We got these millionaires and billionaires who are investing in, cannabis operations, and we got these companies that are listed on the stock market. You know, I used to joke, if there's the show Game of Thrones, and there was the sellsword Bronn, who was one of my favorite characters, and they were talking about how a castle was impregnable. And he said, "Give me 10 good men with climbing spikes, and I'll impregnate the bitch." Excuse my language. And like that's how I felt, right? I was like, if we could just have 10 organizers who were paid in DC, right? Amazon employs more lobbyists than elected members of Congress. If the cannabis policy reform space could get 10 people who it was their job and they were dogged and passionate and tenacious and thoughtful and creative and be able to work well together in DC, like we could move mountains. But at times, at its absolute peak, there were, when I was there, there were seven and seven people, not all full time. Half of those people were part-time or working on other issues, right? I'm thinking Drug Policy Alliance, how they are addressing the whole war on drugs. Or they were like, they were the federal person, but they're spending 70% of their time dealing with state policy. It's time. It's time and being able to build those meaningful long-term relations that you can build upon.
And that's important, and that's what I think people don't seem to realize. It's not only about that communications, keeping those lines of communication open, which I think is where, the listservs and education have been very helpful, at least in keeping us updated information wise. All right, Mike D has a follow-up.
Yeah, I got a follow up, and then I might, excuse me, I have a question. My question's next. But for the speaking of, your volunteers and such, do you guys advertise to try to get volunteers? Is there a way that you guys, how do you go about, how would one go about and saying, hey, I want to volunteer, working with your organization, if people wanted to try to help out with you guys?
So I am out of the game.
Well, okay.
But back, I mean, di different groups did different things. When I was at NORML, I felt very privileged to get to be able, and I thought of how, it was my job to translate the political power of the movement into policy work. But when it comes to, mobilizing volunteers and recruiting new volunteers, I would regularly be talking with chapter leaders around the country who engage in a diversity of tactics, right? The least successful one was, hey, I'm gonna make a post on Facebook and say, hey, we need volunteers, right? Like that's the least effort put in and the least response to it, right? But organizing events, building socials, I'm a big advocate for the idea of just doing regular like in-person engagement structures. When I was in DC, I would host bi-monthly happy hours and invite Hill staffers and other advocates and other people throughout the policy and political spectrums to come, who just might be interested in cannabis, just to come talk and provide that forum. Because, there's no one conversation to rule them all. It's sustained engagement. So I think for when you're trying to recruit volunteers, you got to meet people where they are. If you have to, and you have to know again, going back to expectations management, know exactly what you're asking of them and know exactly what you're telling them is going to happen as a result if they do what you're asking, right? So if you say, hey, we're gonna do this big protest, it's gonna be great, and they show up to the protest and you don't have the next follow-up action, then okay, cool. You guys had a protest, everybody went home, and now there's no like next step, right? Um, unless so there's no one action to rule them all, but through that sustained effort and getting people onto an escalator of radicalization, to get more and more engaged, make sure they feel confident in what you're asking them to do, make sure that they understand why you're asking them to do these things. Hey, we're putting together this public comment forum. We're trying to have a sustained engagement, one person giving public comment at city council every month. Would you be willing to be the one who gives it in May, right? Would you be, or we're doing a lobby day. Hey, will you come have these meetings? And then here's a template for an email to do follow up with the staffers, to follow up with them. Like those kind of things. If you treat, I fear too many people have treated volunteers as if they're not adults and that those and they don't show back up.
No, that's a fact. I mean, you have to treat them as equals, and I've seen too much of that with the grass tops, and I think that's one of the problems we've had with the grass tops is sometimes inflated egos, and they
Yeah.
never come back down to earth, unfortunately. But we can't control that. But
Yeah.
we can control the next question, which is by Mike D.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Justin. So from your experience across multiple states, what unintended consequences of cannabis legalization have had the most material impact, particularly around market structure, regulation, or public perception, and which of those were predictable but ignored?
You know, I'm gonna flip the order of those because talk about egos. I'm struggling to think of something that I didn't see as an unintended consequence. But I was always pretty easy to point out like where I thought there'd be problems. I think for things that we knew were coming. We knew the more tightly you regulated and restrictive of a licensing scheme you had, the longer you would have higher prices and the harder it would be to open that market up for there to be more opportunities for ownership in that model. It's always easier to get more restrictive in licensing than it is to get looser in access. And so around the country, we see all types of examples from Oregon, looking at from Oregon to Colorado to here in Ohio to, the range. So I think that we definitely knew, and I think just af a couple years in, that conversation just wasn't really thoroughly had about ballot initiatives and future efforts for legalization. But I think it was very intentional that that conversation wasn't had, and that's because as MPP and DPA stopped having such a free hand to write the legislate like write ballot initiatives and other state level groups. I'm just thinking national groups um, had had more of a free hand because it was the advocates first putting forward legalization. And as we move towards more like, okay, these five companies are funding this ballot initiative, and they want to make sure that they're going to have they're going to have 80% of the market. Like we knew that was going to happen, but we just didn't really, just market economics is weird when you combine that conversation with justice, right? Like, capitalism and markets versus civil liberties and justice are two very different conversations. And in cannabis, they're infused, and that can be tough. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, unintended consequences. The best example I can think of on unintended consequences was hemp when it was descheduled and just I'll never forget when I first joined NORML in the end of 2016, talking with people in the hemp space. It's like, no, we're different. We're not marijuana. We're talking about rope. We're talking about clothing. And then I was like, cool, I'll be in solidarity with you. How can I be helpful in getting industrial hemp? And then the Farm Bill happened of 2019. And then we see, consumable intoxicating hemp proliferate around the country. And I see absolutely deplorable practices from people in that space that at times not made me, oh, I don't want to say like I didn't feel shame because I didn't feel responsible for their actions, but it gave me a great sense of consternation being like, hey, I was in solidarity with the industrial hemp people. I didn't advocate for this. And it makes me think like, you know what? I don't want to say recriminalize hemp, right? But at the same time, I kind of do, right? Or at least like any consumable intoxicating thing has to be all within one market when it comes to protecting consumers, right? So I think that's the pivot that I make. But like, holy shit, around the corner from my house, there's Wonka's Smoke Shop, and they're clearly ripping off Willy Wonka's IP. And the window, it's a big animated purple Willy Wonka going out for a hug with two joints in each hand, or with a joint in each hand. And I'm like, man, it's 1,200 feet away from a school. So they're outside for 1,000 feet. But like, that's not what I got into this for. It upsets me. So I think that was like, yeah, I knew it wasn't going to go out smoothly, but I didn't think it was going to get that bad.
Nobody expected it to be what it became. Otherwise, so we would have planned accordingly. But
Yeah.
yeah, we all got the same shit show together. So
Yeah. But
going
no,
on.
thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that question.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of layers to it, and especially with the hemp one. All right, Mary Lynn, you're up with our next question, council member.
Hey, Justin.
Hey there,
Nice
Mike.
meeting you here.
You as
Another
well.
Virginian. Nothing moves in Washington without money. Hmm. I'm thinking, especially now in this Trump era, and I'm thinking, or without extreme praise. You guys heard about that award he just got? I take it. Anyway, that's another. Anyway, guaranteed to be a slow rollout because I think he has other intentions. In your estimation, was the recent push by Trump to reclassify marijuana mostly influenced by big business interests? And do you think other lobbying efforts, such as your Bold PAC supports, can have any significant effect as regards to criminal reform taking place alongside or even ahead of banking reform?
So that's a very good question. And nice to talk with you too, Marilyn. Thank you. And yeah, no, they're depending on how much we want to peel the onion on the administration more broadly. I'll just say I'll be in the streets tomorrow for the No Kings rally, mobilization. But but like I have heard from a couple of different people that I trust that basically the quid pro quo in the president of the United States posting on Truth Social was $250,000 contribution. In exchange for him posting, there was a video that was posted a few months back where about like CBD or whatever it was, right? My understanding that the price of admission was $250,000.
Okay.
Could be wrong. I don't know, but that's what I had a couple of people call me right after that happened. They're like, "Oh my God, Justin, you see it?" I'm like, "No, man, I retired. I'm not following the president on Truth Social. Like, I did not see." But yeah, out of curiosity, I did some digging. Um, this presidency, it is the most well documented corruption we've seen in Washington D.C. in quite some time, and I just all due respect to my former co-conspirators and those who I haven't had the privilege of organizing with, but who focus on the criminal justice stuff. Like they're just not going to give them the money, right? And they don't have the money, even if they did it. Like if they were willing to, they don't have the money, right? Um, so I think what the president did was basically he just did the same thing that the Biden administration, Joe Biden did, only instead of writing, "Hey, you should schedule three" in a memo that the president signed. He put it on an executive order that the president signed, right? So it's if anything, we could call it Joe Biden's policy. Um, I disagree with the policy, and Mike and I have discussed many times over the years about our differences of approach when it comes to presidential authority and exploring the controlled substances scheduling. But I'm retired, so my thoughts don't matter that much. But I think that as for people who are pro people or or who advocate for policy that is pro people, um, the best thing you can do right now is try and build deeper relationships within Congress and try for everybody, everybody here, unless you live in one of the U.S. territories or Washington, D.C., you have one U.S. representative and you have two U.S. senators, and if you have the time, bird dog them, show up, build relationships with the people in their district offices, present yourself as somebody who is affable and authoritative, that your shit, you're going to tell them true things, and you're going to keep showing up. And I think that if we can build a bulwark, a better bulwark in Congress, regardless of whatever happens, should the Department of Justice actually execute a reclassification to Schedule 3 or not, it's still just a temporary thing. And ultimately, if there's going to be a regulatory regime, it's got to come from Congress. And especially now in this um, era where we recently saw the Supreme Court. It's known as the Chevron decision. That they struck it down, saying agencies now are not going to have deference when it comes to writing regulations, and it has to be more explicit from Congress. That just makes heavier Congress's hand in writing regulations. And it's that much more important to be having those thoughtful conversations and making sure that congressional staffers actually understand what the hell it is they're talking about, because 9 times out of 10, or maybe it's 95 times out of 100, congressional staffers have very large portfolios. They're overwhelmed all the time, and they just have relationships with a couple of lobbyists whom they trust because those lobbyists are paid to earn their confidence. That they'll call those people. So it's up to the advocates to become the person who's the trusted one. And I'll say it, you can email my successor at normal Morgan Fox, Morgan at norml.org. Bug him. It is his job, but also give him some grace, because since I left, there's half as many people working there now, and I guess things just got worse after I left. So, but if you can, I know that it's really important to kind of build that bulwark, because regardless of the absurdity of this administration, it's no matter what it is they do, it's still only temporary. And when it comes to one day, maybe the Republic will fall first, and all of this will be moot. But if you're going to want a regulatory regime in the United States of America, it's going to come from Congress.
All right. Next up will be Leslie Fries, council member.
Hey, thanks, Etienne. Justin, it's good to see you again.
You as well.
Yeah. Having worked as a federal lobbyist, what tactics or strategies have you seen consistently move legislation forward in Washington? And what approaches tend to generate attention but little actual progress?
Social media posts get attention but no progress. I will just say that. Not to say you shouldn't have social media, fine, but God, I've been off social media for the last 2 months, and it's been wonderful for my mental health. I think, going back to what I was, I was going to string a couple of things I've mentioned together a little bit more concisely. Like, understanding who the cardinals are on the relevant committees of jurisdiction, and building relationships with them, building out relationships with people in those members, and to the best that you can, if you don't personally live in a committee member's district, finding allies who do live in their districts, and leveraging those relationships. I know that when we were pushing the first ever hearing on the scheduling of marijuana in the House of, well, it was not the first ever, but the first in decades, in the House of Representatives, the Judiciary Committee, like Virginia NORML and so many other Virginia cannabis advocates had already done so much work and built relationships when it came to the members from that state, they already pretty basically knew what was going on, right? And that was so much nicer than some of these other states where you don't have as much of an organized on the ground presence that can be leveraged to focus on federal. And again, just that, and unfortunately, it's always easier to, just hire people who already have pre-existing relationships. That's why when you go on lobbyists, lobby shops websites, they show you, oh, look, we employ all these people. And the first line of like all of their resumes is, they were policy director for so-and-so, and they had previously worked for so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. And like, that means they know people in those offices. They can get their calls answered in that passive, corrupt way. Whereas it's a lot harder for advocates who are just going on, sheer piss and vinegar and the moral superiority of being right. That to build those relationships without, having it pay your mortgage. So I think that's just it's the slow boring. It really is a slow boring. I will say. One big argument that happens is, whether or not direct action is effective, right? There's a lot of different people can have a lot of different positions on this. when I was in DC, there was a local group, DCMJ, District of Columbia Marijuana Justice, and they engaged in what I would classify as a little spicier protests, where they would do like smokeouts and things like that, or they would do joint giveaways to people on Capitol Hill. And while it wasn't tactics I would engage in, because I didn't think that that was a constructive way for me as a messenger to advance what I was doing. I had other people who, would call me up and tell me to get them to knock it off and to get them to stop. And I'm not going to get them to stop because now I'm getting more congressional offices calling me because they asked their friend, "Hey, what the hell's up with these guys passing out joints?" And their friend, who I'd had a meeting with maybe 6 months earlier, was like, "Well, I don't know, but I met with this guy Justin, and he knows his shit. Here's his contact information. You should talk to him." Right? So I think we all do better when we all do better, and I support a diversity of tactics. And the question is what best revs your engine that's going to keep you in the movement for sustained effort without burning out? And for your allies, what best revs their engine to keep them going? And then how can you work in a better symphony to make sure, you're not always going to be on the same page, you're not always going to agree with the same tactic, but how can you have any tensions that arise be constructive and not destructive?
Especially now. Especially now. All right. Council member Landau. Nate, you are up next, sir.
Hey, Nate.
Hey, Justin. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
hear you. Now we can see you.
First of all, Justin, I wanted to thank you. You were the first one to push me onto the federal level. I was a chapter leader in Contra Costa County in California, and you were the political director. And you said anyone that wants a one-on-one, you're more than welcome. And I took you up on the offer. So thank you. And just to strengthen what you said about direct action, the last time the Veterans Action Council was on Capitol Hill, it was a veteran bill was about to die in a committee, and we happened to be there, and you told us put a lot of effort into that, and we did, and we actually sat in the Veterans Affairs Committee office, and that forget the Republican's name, Mike something. He had three staffers that were all veterans, and he let the bill get voted on in his committee. So being at the right place at the right time is really important. My question is, you spent years as a federal lobbyist. What's the most honest assessment of where cannabis reform actually stands in Washington right now versus the narrative we keep?
Well, Nate, it's so good to see you again. And I'm before I answer your question, I'm gonna pose a question to you guys. What is the narrative we keep hearing when you ask what is what's reality versus the narrative you keep hearing? Give me an example. Anybody on this, not just Nate.
Oh,
Like what is this narrative that I'm juxtaposing against?
Donald Trump legalized marijuana. He wrote a
Okay.
thing and I saw in the paper. So marijuana's
Yep.
legal now, right?
Yes. Okay. All right. Cool. That's where I thought we were going. I just wanted to make sure. So, oh God. Yeah. No. Oh my God. Yeah. All right. So Donald Trump just basically did it exactly what Joe Biden did, only instead of putting it on a regular piece of paper, he put it on a piece of paper with a gold star, and there has been just as much action since that piece of paper was signed. That, to my knowledge. Now, look, there could be, and perhaps one of you are involved in, and hopefully, many people are involved in regular efforts to agitate for actual movement. But from my very retired and very lay perspective, it blows my mind to hear people say that something was done when nothing has fundamentally changed. If anything, Donald Trump, he was the president who signed the farm bill that descheduled hemp, and now we see Congress moving to recriminalize hemp, and so the question, arguably a lot of people, myself included, thought that the first administration was just kind of like, fumbling around and just kind of by happenstance, whereas this time Trump 2.0 seems to be much better organized, and we saw a lot of the blueprint with efforts like from the Heritage Foundation, what they put out, Project 2025, like they put out the blueprint. So, I have to ask myself, like if Donald Trump didn't want to recriminalize hemp, if he thought about it constructively and cared, he could have told Congress, "Hey, I'm not going to sign the bill with that in it." So, arguably, we're seeing the biggest, the worst president on marijuana policy since Nixon in Donald Trump 2.0. And not even to mention the fact that the majority of um, drug-related deportations are from marijuana-related infractions, and the overwhelming majority of those. Last time I was talking with another advocate earlier this week, and they told me 75% of drug-related drug deportations are for marijuana possession alone, right? So not even distribution. Um, so I think, what the if the rhetoric that a lot of people are sharing on the internet is profoundly frustrating, and I think that, honestly, I think a lot of it, always check your sources, right? If it's coming from people who have a financial stake in the industry doing better, then they are, then why would you trust them? Why would you? We should deplatform, right, or at least de-emphasize the things that are said by people who have a financial stake in an outcome. Every single year I was on Capitol Hill, every single year, the industry lobbyists told me, and they weren't just telling me, they were telling their clients who were writing those checks for them, well, this can be the year we get banking done. We just need to dig a little bit deeper. We're almost there. This can be the year, right? And like, look, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, still shame on you. Fool me three times. All right, I'm a fucking fool, right? And and it's if you have a financial incentive in an outcome, then obviously you're going to do anything that you can to try and manifest that. And I fear that the loudest voices now, when if that's what the what you're hearing is, I imagine a lot of them are coming from people who have a financial incentive, or maybe it's just like another additional like political ideological sorting. Like, hey, I wasn't going to give Joe Biden credit when he said he supported the exact same thing, but now I'm going to give Donald Trump credit. Like, I criticized Biden when he did it too. So, but I think it's going to be hard. I think when it comes to Congress, please see my previous comments about how Congress needs to put forward anything that would be durable and long lasting going forward. Um, it's kind of in this feedback loop, right? Like, oh, momentum's not really happening, so Congress, so people aren't really pushing, but in Congress, they're not hearing from constituents, so why? So they're not going to start moving anything, right? And it becomes this like doom loop. When we were pushing to get the first ever vote to deschedule marijuana in the House of Representatives, one of the things that we did at NORML was we created an onboarding escalatory call structure, and I think we had like 900 people sign up to make phone calls throughout the course of the campaign. And I built it was the ask was that we wanted to make 3 calls a week. And we picked two Democrats and one Republican, because at the time Democrats were running the House. And we picked members of the committees of jurisdiction, and like who were the critical votes, who were the critical players, and I invited normal supporters in small batches to sign up. So we aimed to get about 100 people signed up each week. And so 100 people would be asked to make the first 3 calls. Week 2, those 100 people would be given 3 new calls. And then we would have recruited another 100 people to call back those 3 offices we had the first batch call the last week. And we built upon that momentum. So it got to the point where it's just this drumbeat every week, congressional offices' phones. Of those 100 people, based on some of the data, the feedback we got, I think only like on average, only like 25% of them, 25 people would actually make those calls per week. But that was 25 calls in a sustained drumbeat that wouldn't have happened otherwise, right? And that meant every single week these people were thinking about it. And I think that to get Congress to move, you have to have that kind of sustained drumbeat, and that was the most effective tactic that I had found that really helped us get over the finish line just before the buzzer at the end of the whatever session. I used to know these things off the top of my head, whatever number session of Congress that was when they had that vote at the end of 2020.
Council member Freeze has a follow-up.
Yeah, Justin, I want to ask you what your thoughts are on Trump's move to have Medicare pick up CBD products with up to 3 milligrams of THC, which is not the 0.4 milligrams we're seeing in the intoxicating hemp ban, and still doesn't, it still seems so arbitrary. But
Mhm.
do you think it's actually going to happen? And I mean,
Don't forget the $500 limit, right?
prices are coming down.
So I have to admit I am not well versed on this suggestion. I called I talked to a reporter friend of mine yesterday, and he mentioned this to me as something that might come up, and I'm like, okay, well that sounds like a novel idea, but admittedly I didn't dive in on it. I look, I as a human being, as an American, I support Medicare for all. After being my grandfather's caretaker, and bringing him to the VA where they had, socialized medicine. They treated him great, right? And we were, my family, I was profoundly grateful for all the support they did. I know that America can do socialized medicine. Well, I mean, sure, VA could be better. Everyone, you guys could tell me how, but from my lived experience, it was great for my grandfather. But so if that's something that could happen, cool, I guess. I don't know. I mean, is it tied saying like only these three companies are going to get it, and it just happens to be one of the companies who wrote him the $250,000 check to get him to share the video on True Social? Or are we talking like, is this going to be like a consumer rebate where, like, they go down to their local health and wellness center at the gas station, right? Or how does that work, right? So the devil's going to be in the details, but I'm all for the United States of America having a universal healthcare program and covering the costs of people's medical needs.
All right, next up will be Michael Crowitz. Councilmember Crowitz, you're up.
Thank you, Etienne. Yeah, I'll give you this question, but I wanted to tweak it a little bit too. So bear with me a second. But the question is, cannabis reform increasingly crosses party lines. In your experience working across campaigns and policy issues, what arguments or framing resonate most with policymakers who may still be skeptical? And the way I wanted to tweak this is that it seems that for many years, the Republican Party was just not only dead set against reform, but often using it as a weapon against any Democrats that would step out of line. And it's the soft on crime, would be something that the Democrats were afraid of to even try to do any cannabis reform. So not only were the Republicans, against it, but they were sort of preventing it from even moving forward at all in many cases. And I guess, do you see that as sort of gone and maybe has a couple little brush fires still around, or do you see that as something brewing, under the surface in the Republican Party? I think the Democratic Party has certainly showed itself to be a cannabis reforming party once the reins are off, once there's no constraints. We saw that in Virginia, and we saw that even a tiny bit with Joe Biden. So yeah, I'm really curious about your cross party lines thoughts on this.
Yeah, I thank you. That's and I'm glad you gave me a little bit of additional context, because it made me think. First off, let me disagree with the premise of the question for a moment. Because it's not all Republicans are in favor of prohibition, and not all Democrats are in favor of reform. And I think at this juncture in time, the two biggest the biggest age or I'm sorry the biggest factor determining whether or not an individual policymaker is going to be more for reform or more for ongoing prohibition is their age, not their party, right? Um, I mean, obviously, this is just a correlation, not causation, but I think that's the biggest indicator these days, and just like kind of the intransigence and the difficulty in moving bigger machines. Like it was very hard for us, but we were successful in getting the Democratic leadership of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate to embrace reform, and we did so by appealing to their stated moral framework and getting cannabis to be incorporated in it. So a lot of Democrats, care about racial justice. So we said, hey, here's the data about, the racial implications of criminalization and the fact that in America, you're 4 times more likely to be arrested if you're black than if you're white. And I had this whole shtick where I would be, in DC and it was legal for me to gift cannabis. So I had these little containers. I'd put a little nug in a paper and I would hand it to people, not in the Capitol. I didn't bring drugs into the Capitol, if for those of you who are listening. NSA. But I would be like, hey, this is legal for me to give you. It's enough for a joint. If you want it, here you go. Just pointing it out because across the river in Arlington, now I could go to jail, but I'm not worried about it because I'm white. And in Arlington, you're 8 times more likely to go to jail if you're black than you're white. So I'll probably be fine, right? And just being able to like literally be able to give people that grounded context where if we were a mile and a half away, what I just put in your hand makes you a criminal, right? Um, but with Republicans, I think there's I've worked a lot with a lot of the libertarians and more libertarian oriented folks, and this is well known to you, Michael. Like, they're usually much more willing and even eager to have the conversations about the civil liberties impacts. Um, but it's hard to find alignment on this. I mean, it's cannabis policy is so multipolar, where there are aspects from a quote unquote left and a quote unquote right, or liberal and progressive versus conservative or libertarian. That it's difficult to find a sweet spot. I know I tried really hard to do what I could to be in concert and like kind of build that symphony and just as a member of it. But it was hard. And I think, yeah, with the Republicans, just meet them where they are. I mean, I increasingly was frustrated towards the end of my time in cannabis policy because so much of the conversation just became about the economics and who was going to profit. On the on the with the number of paid advocates decreasing and the number of industry lobbyists going through the roof. When I started, there were 11 people who were paid to represent the industry at the end of 2016. When I left, there were over 200 lobbyists who in some way, shape, or form were profiting to advance the profits of largely a handful of multi-state operators. Um, that I got into it, and what fueled my fire was my righteous indignation against criminalization, and the fact that when I was a kid, I got arrested with my best friend, and I got a slap on the wrist, and he got real penalties and ramifications, and the only difference between us was the color of our skin. So like that's what fueled my fire to focus on the civil liberties and criminal justice stuff. Um, but yeah, it's tough. It's tough, Michael. I wish if there was a silver bullet, we would have won a long time ago. Um, but I hope that we're one you'll again going back to talk with local lawmakers, right? Cannabis policy that impacts people is done at the city level and the state level, and there you can build those relationships. And Tom Garrett, the second Republican to introduce marijuana deschedule or legislation to deschedule marijuana, was a state senator in Virginia who we talked to when I was there in 2015. And he's like, look, I can't support this because it conflicts with federal law. But if I was in Congress, I would support ending criminalization. And God damn it, he when he got elected, he introduced the bill. Um, so there's it's tough. There are bigger issues in polarization. But Michael, does that answer your question or
He has a follow-up.
yeah? I know that was
Well,
my
Leslie go first.
oh
Mine was for the last one.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
All
Yep.
right,
Hey, Mike.
so yeah, so you know, no, I'm not ready to ask my question, and my brain just went totally blank. Um,
can I talk smack on
oh.
the Democrats for a second? Can I call out a couple specific Democrats? All right. Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I'm sure at least half of y'all have an opinion on her. And yeah, that is the correct two birds. I like so like this whole hashtag not all Democrats, like Dick Durbin, right? And he's the former chairman of or former Democratic lead of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I was just pulling it up before this call just to confirm. And now or no, like Durbin was bad on this issue, right? And now he's retiring. He's going to be gone. We'll have a new lead Democrat on House or Senate Judiciary. Hopefully, someone better. But yeah, they're Marcy Kaptur, right? I love Marcy Kaptur. She's a congresswoman from Ohio. She's great on so many issues. She's when it comes to talking about like labor issues, I love everything she says. When it comes to cannabis, she has a personal experience from when she was younger that like I get my understanding, and I probably should say this, but whatever, I'm retired. Like apparently, like she was dating a guy and he got high and got in a car accident, and because of that experience, she will never be personally comfortable supporting marijuana policy reform. And it took a tremendous amount of political pressure from Democratic leadership to get her to vote the right way. And over her personal objections. And that's why it's so critical to get leadership. Because if you don't have leadership on board, they're the ones who run the votes and the schedules. So with that, did that give you time, Michael? What were you thinking? What else do you want to talk about in that context?
Michael, did you have your follow-up or you're gonna pass? We'll go on.
I'm
Okay.
gonna have to pass. Yeah, my brain is turned to mush on Friday night here. I'm sorry.
That's all right. You reach out anytime you think of it. Even if you can call me tomorrow if you think of it then.
All right. Next up will be Doc. You're back with another question.
Certainly. Your work also touches campaign finance, tax policy, and wage fairness. How do these broader policy issues intersect with the future of the cannabis industry and equitable access?
No, that I feel very fortunate that prior to being recruited to join NORML, I spent a year and a half working at a small nonprofit in DC that focused on campaign finance, tax, and wage policy because I think it gave me a better foundation to build upon as I was increasingly expected to engage in the economic side of these issues and just give me a healthy appreciation while working on campaign finance to understand the broken nature of our the fact that we've privatized our electoral process, right? So, I never when I was at NORML or later when I ran my own PAC, I never had the money to write the big checks to be able to show up to all the fundraisers. So I had to get real creative and thankfully, there's a substance that I enjoy that from time to time that really helps me relax and think creatively about different tactics. We particularly I think on this for this question, taxes is the biggest question. I worked on progressive income taxation issues, trying to make sure that we could lower income tax rates for working people while raising tax rates. That radical socialist who won World War II, then went on to be elected president, Dwight Eisenhower. During his administration, the top marginal tax rate was 92%, on the equivalent of income, or at the time it was like $1 million. And just people in this country don't understand marginal tax rates, but that's a whole other thing. But when it comes to this issue, I was really, really proud of the kind of compromise and coalition we built for the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, where, right now you have this entire industry just, harmed by 280E, and the inability to deduct things that every other aspect of the legal economy is able to deduct, and that's because of the broader issue of we incentivize so many things through our tax code. We kind of, in many ways, substitute actual policy with tax policy, and the problem is that it's lobbyists who are paid for to write that policy, which is why we got things like the Big Beautiful Bill. Anyway, different subject. But the when it comes to, for the MORE Act, we got a 5% tax rate. Democrats were trying to get us to have it be a 25% tax rate. And we got, because of the solidarity I'd built with the criminal justice reform community, when they tried to make it be 25%, I was able to call friends at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and the ACLU and others who we'd worked together on the criminal justice reform pieces, saying, hey, Democrats are going to tell you that they want to raise it at 25, they want to tax it at 25%, and they're going to give whatever cause you want half that money. Will you stay with us and just at 5% though? Because if we go to 25%, we're going to lose all this other aspects of our critical fragile coalition. So, policymakers are regularly looking for new ways to raise revenue that isn't raising taxes on, corporations and the wealthy. So cannabis policy presents a real easy, fish in a barrel. Hey, we can raise some money and we're not pissing off our big donors, right? And I think that's something that yeah, I've seen a lot of tension in the cannabis community during my time. So I support low taxes and making sure every nickel of that goes to either making sure we have a pro-consumer regulatory structure, right? And a little bit extra to address the harms that the state had did. I'd rather that come out of the general fund. I'd rather it come out of the general fund. But the state built this oppression machine. The state should pay to address the harms. But keeping it low. I think, having that background really was helpful and being a credible actor trying to navigate those waters.
Yeah, you got to have the character to sustain it or to survive it. Michael Krauts has a follow-up.
I finally remembered. No, you had said before that something that we've generally seen to be true over time, and that is that the drug warriors are sort of aging out, and that they're not really being replaced, demographically, let's say it that way. And I actually was afraid, when Kevin Sabet first came around, which was a long time ago now, but he was a young man and he was, writing speeches for the drug czar's office and stuff like that. And I was like, oh man, if there's a small fraction of what they were before, but they're all Kevin Sabets, we're in trouble. But that hasn't really proved out either. There's a very tiny number of Kevin Sabets, thankfully. In fact, one and a couple of proteges. And on that, I want to dig into that a tiny bit. Like, what is it about it? My theory is that you can't unlearn stuff. We've learned about the cannabinoid receptor system. We've learned that cannabis is medicine. We've learned that you can use it safely, under certain circumstances, more safely than a lot of the pharmaceuticals, these kind of things. But is that true? Is it more the experience of regulation and seeing that the sky didn't fall and that the children didn't all run out and immediately start shooting heroin because you legalized marijuana? I mean, dig into that a tiny bit, and then on that, Kevin Sabet's narrative, he seems to believe that this is a trend line that we started in cannabis reform at what, like 13% or 17% back in 1970, support for legalization, and worked our way up through 25%, I think, in 1972 or whatever it was, that impressed Moscone, right? That he thought, oh my God, 25% of California voted for this. This is something worth working on. And from that, we worked it up to I think 68% before Grass Tops got involved and kicked in some money on Prop 215, and we started the ball rolling on reform. So I mean, I think he sees himself as maybe fighting that curve, that he's starting with this low number and he's just going to work it up. And if I'm right in any capacity in the first premise, first part of it, then he can't do that. You'd have to have some change in the baseline information. Or am I wrong? Am I missing something?
Well, I don't presume to know about Kevin, his actual honest considerations, right? I remember at NORML, it was the policy of the executive director that I was working on that we don't acknowledge that Project Sand exists. Because why would we, as an organization that has 27% national name ID, acknowledge the existence of somebody who only 2,700 people know about, right? So it's like, why would we uplift him, right? And give him that oxygen. Um, but that being said, I say all of that so I can then, presume to know what's in his head, which is it's a lot easier to stop something from happening in DC than it is to get something to happen in DC. And I'm sure that he is paying himself very generously from his donors, and he is living a very comfortable, at least life. And if he can continue to get that check to just show up and be able to continue to be a wrench in the broken gears of our democracy, it is to his personal advantage. And he doesn't have to grow his support. He just needs to maintain relationships with key members of key committees or key administrative offices that are those choke points, right? And so my worst case outcome to address his thoughts is he's just completely craven and loves the fact that he's probably paying himself a $500,000 a year. I don't know, I'm pulling that number out of my butt, but like I wouldn't be surprised at all. And so there's that. But to the way you opened your question, you said something, I don't like disagreeing with you, and it's only happened a couple of times over the years, but you said something I disagree with. You said, we know about the medical benefits of cannabis, and we know about the cannabinoid system, and we might know, but you were asking it in the context of Washington, D.C., and in that case, we did not know. And it was, one of the things that I found so frustrating, and it really made me think about politicians in a different light, was how frequently congressional staffers would turn over. And because every time there was a congress, like the member of Congress is being inundated with everything all the time, but they typically have, staffers dedicated to policy portfolios. So if you're working with that office and they're carrying your bill, it's the staffer who's doing the work, not the member. um, you know, you work with the staffer for 20 hours, so that way, and then maybe you'll get, one or two actions from the member. Hey, member, I need you to call so and so and get them to co-sponsor the bill or ask for a hearing or whatever, right? So like there's this guy, and I shouldn't name names, but Tim Ryan of Ohio. Talk about other bad Democrats, right? He said all the right things on our issue, but he was such a horrible boss that he had staff turnover every couple of months where I stopped bothering to try to lobby his office. Because like, yeah, they keep on saying that they're going to do stuff we want, but if they're not going to employ people who are actually going to do it, then I'm literally just wasting time once a quarter to have that like first sit down hour-long meeting. Hey, here's the state of play. Here's why this bill, here are the bills your boss is a co-sponsor on. Here are the things that he said in the past. Da, 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 da. Like it's just a waste of time. And so yeah, don't ever presume that the person who you're talking to on the other side of the table at the government knows anything, right? And that's why when you're dealing with limited attention, you got to make sure that you're keeping your and you know this. I'm not telling you because you know this, but like keeping your pitch tight. And tell them what you want to tell them, and then tell them you told them, and then make sure they feel comfortable and they got it.
All right. Next up will be Mike D.
Okay, that's a fascinating insight into, DC politics and, yeah. So, yeah, exactly.
Hey
Very,
man, I like along those lines, I took very seriously the responsibility and the privilege and the honor that I had getting to have the job that I did at NORML. And it's because I was standing upon the shoulders of thousands and thousands and thousands of other people, and like I wanted to do a good job on their behalf, and coincidentally I agreed with them on pretty much everything. But like we live in such a profoundly challenging time in the sense of in many ways America today is the same way America's pretty much always been. We just now have the technology to be able to identify how awful things are and talk about it on a regular basis, right? So when it comes to addressing federal policy, like again, just going back to managing expectations, not just for your members, not just for your supporters, not just for your volunteers, to prevent burnout and drift and demobilization, but yourself. Right? I got burned out of the cannabis policy space, right? I got yelled at by people who I didn't think it was appropriate for them to yell at me because I'm not doing enough to satisfy whatever it is from them. And I'm like, I've been out here working for you for years and years and years, and now you're giving me the third degree because like in my narrower focus is I can't raise money and and I only can give part time to it. I'm not doing enough for you. Like, no, fuck that. And it made it real easy for me to pack up my ball and go home. I left because my grandfather was diagnosed with mesothelioma and he lived with me and I was his caretaker. And I was just like, I can't, I got to focus on this. And so that's why I folded up my shop. But when it came, after he passed and I was thinking about what to do next, I was like, it made it real easy for me not to go back because I got burnt out.
And
yeah,
burnout's real. Go ahead, Mike.
yeah.
But if I can come back and talk with you guys and pull back the curtain from my experience and it helps you or anybody else, I'm happy to.
Yeah. Yeah, so for this next question, so if you were advising, advocates working on veterans access to cannabis today, what are the two or three strategic priorities they should focus on over the next year?
Ooh. So that is a good question, and I'm gonna deflect again. I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna. It's you tell me one or two of your priorities, and I'll tell you how I think you could best advance it. Free consultation time. Let's go. I used to jokingly tell people that I charge 420 an hour for this. Friends and family got the rate of $50 an hour,
Well,
and
all right. We've gotten medical cannabis access by doctors writing prescriptions into the House, into the Senate. It's made it into the bills multiple times, got all the way to the end to be the only thing pulled out of the bill.
Yep.
How do you get that over the fucking hill?
Yep. Nope. And this is why Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz was among the first names that or was the first name that I listed, exactly because of that issue, right? An absolute just devastating, knowing that I was really proud of the efforts and the team we put together and that I got to be a part of, working with the congressional offices who put forward those amendments and Senator Merkley and Congressman Blumenauer and a rotating cast of characters and Congressman Joyce's office in the House and Senator Schatz and Senator Murkowski and like a number of others, like they had staff who was working on this issue. And we were able to get it in both chambers. So to that issue, I think, I mean, if somebody's primarying Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, support them, right? Like, Republicans not going to win in Broward County, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, but like if there's a primary, support them, right? There was one a couple of years back. I forget the guy's name, but he was somebody who was like willing to say nice stuff about cannabis, and I was still at NORML at the time, and we, I was supportive of their efforts in my free time. Like, yeah, I mean, this is another one of those things where like we've had a lot of arguments about, whether or not if the president gives a directive, is it lawful? But like we're in the nothing really matters era. So if you have the ability to bend the ear of those lobbyists, or not those lobbyists, those industry interests who are writing the $250,000 checks to the Trump campaign, and if you feel comfortable putting yourself in a position to be a political to be a political pawn, and if you're that if you'd be comfortable with that, I would say, hey, just have the president sign an executive order saying that they can, right? Now, I'm not saying I would do that. I have profound, but like during Trump won, I spoke with people in the White House on a regular basis, trying to work with them to see around the contours of what could be done. Unfortunately, at the time, they kept on, for them, everything is a press strategy. Everything is a flash, flashy flash. And being a steward of the political power at NORML, like I was like, well, no, we want policy reform, so we want something durable that's actually going to do something. So we don't, and I tried to work with them on that, but they didn't want to do that. So I don't know. Maybe there's that. I wouldn't do it. I don't advise you to do it. I'm just saying it's an idea. But yeah, no. Primary Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Keep working the House Appropriations and Senate Appropriations chairs. This year, Senator Susan Collins is still the chair of Appropriations, and she's facing a real challenge. It's looking like Graham Plattner is going to win the Democratic nomination. I know Governor Janet Mills is still in contention, and we'll see how that shakes out. But leveraging that political pressure, like if you have members in Maine, getting them to approach the senator and saying like, look, we have been disappointed year after year after year after year on this. Like, tell us to our face, are we going to be disappointed again? Or, we are willing to back you if you make this actually a reality. Because with her having the pen there as one of the four corners, if you will, you might get it. I mean, Senator Schumer's office, I don't know if he still has the same policy staffer handling the issue. If he does, they're fantastic, and they were always a really good member of the four corners. And then in the Senate on the ranking Democrat, you got Patty Murray. So people in Washington as well. In the House, I don't know who's leading in the House these days. But check that out too.
Mike D has a follow-up.
Yeah, hey, you said something that caught my ear. You said something about the press coverage and how the administration is kind of looking for flashy stuff, right? So I guess in your experience working around that era, is that what they're kind of maybe looking for? For example, like yeah, for this second time around, we see things like, Hegseth's up there doing his flashy stuff with the war and all that stuff, right? And they're trying to make it look all super cool and whatever. So when it comes to like say things like policy and things like that, if they were to try and like with that executive order, it came out kind of, it seemed like right at the exact same time to try to deflect from the Epstein files, right? Exactly, yeah. So if we're thinking in terms of, trying to instead of, trying to drop 250K or something along those lines, what would be maybe some other approaches or, things that could be something that could catch the eye of the administration that could maybe, work in their benefit that could potentially advance cannabis policy that you could, that you've been around that, you know what I'm saying? Something like that.
Yeah, yeah, and to be clear, my experience with the first Trump administration and what I'm witnessing with the second is two very different things, right? And to your point, to your exact point, like, what I experienced in the first time, it was, it didn't, it only felt like the cruelty was the point on like 20% of their agenda, whereas now it feels like the cruelty is the point on everything, right? Or deflecting from certain islands is everything, right? But you know, like this seems so different. I think the question is how you want to engage with different agencies, and I would actually, I'd be real curious to hear Michael weigh in on this as well. Um, about like approaching different agencies and what you're finding as far as like our professional staff that who have been in these agencies who aren't political, like are they still there? Are they, are you hearing that they're planning on sticking around? Are they, or is there a fear of an exodus? Because my wife went during Trump one, she was working at the Department of Energy at the end of the Obama administration, and then when the Trump administration came in, she was working in the energy efficiency, renewable energy division, and like her whole team got basically gagged from doing their work, and most of them, moved on. So like, I don't even know if the right people to engage in those conversations are even there. So Michael, you came off
I
mic.
I can maybe shed a little insight from what we've seen in Vienna. Interestingly, excuse me, during President Trump's first administration, he didn't seem from when I say he, the executive branch, administration didn't seem to micromanage that much in Vienna. Around the second year or so, things sort of eased up, we worked through a very important treaty change during his first administration. Working with quietly behind the scenes without raising much ruckus or getting anybody in trouble. We worked with the administration on a lot of stuff back then.
Yeah.
This year we were in Vienna, and this is already the second year in the administration, and we got the feeling that every single thing that the U.S. delegation was saying on the microphone was coming directly from Washington, D.C. And it was a little eerie, actually, because the only time I've ever really seen that is, with like Russia or Nigeria or something. Never really a free country, quote unquote free country. So, but anyway, I think that during the first administration, a lot of people sort of held their head down and sort
Yeah.
of hid a little bit.
Yeah.
This time, I'm getting the feeling it's even worse. I don't expect really to see anybody inside the administration until after the administration, essentially. They and maybe they'll still be there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, no, thank you, and that confirms what I feared that you would say. And just for whoever else might be listening, if I could say like that, Michael, what I'm hearing you say really underscores the importance of um, you know thinking about tomorrow, right? Assuming that our nation continues to hold, right? And we don't see the republic fall in the next couple of years. I used to joke like, yeah, no, I'm working to end marijuana prohibition, but maybe the republic will fall before that happens. Like it used to be a joke, and then and then other things happened since then. Um, and I like and it doesn't feel it's not funny to me anymore. But I have to laugh or else, when I don't want to cry for the state of our broken politics. But my you hearing you say that really sorry, that just like kind of like that really pushes me back and I appreciate that, you know, you're still around in the fight, and I'm, if and when I got $100 for your next flight when you go out next time in the next administration, right? You call me up when you're fundraising to go out under the next president, and I'll kick in for it, because we're gonna send you back, and hopefully it's not gonna be some kind of like state controlled bullshit like what you're describing.
Well, it's
It,
gonna be some time. Go ahead, Mike.
yeah, I was gonna say it was more of like a declarative statement, and it was more declarative and kind of authoritative. And they came out and announced and said, we are declaring a war on all precursor chemicals, and those chemicals are we're declaring them chemical warfare. Exact words. Chemical warfare is what they called them. And that was kind of their premise for, attacking and using strikes against other countries. So that's what they said on the floor of the UN.
Yeah, generally the administration is taking the metaphor away from the drug war. That's their contribution to history. Nixon created the drug war. Trump is making it a real war.
Yeah, and we saw again this week more extrajudicial killings in the open seas, which we were talking with various member states just a couple of weeks ago. Justin, Mike D, Mike Crowitz, Nate, and myself were at the UN, dealing, directly on the floor talking, and it was the second year we didn't even see our regular Justice Department people that we usually see, because they're not even being sent internationally. Because as Michael used to joke, it's really funny. We have to go to Vienna to see our own government, and all that's currently there are just diplomats, which
Yeah.
are just on the ground people who just receive a memo from DC and then read it accordingly. Because I confronted them last year on the floor and was like, "Who are you? You are not our regular people." They're like, "Oh, we're just local diplomats. Nobody was flown, so we're not going to know until about 15 minutes before I read it to the world." I was like, "Oh, good to know." Okay,
Yeah.
so who people are there? They're just placeholders, unfortunately, right now, and especially across the diplomatic phases. And whoever gets into office next, if office is allowed to be next, is just going to be do nothing but a lot of just basic janitorial cleanup, right? And trying to reestablish, allies, because we have pissed all over all of our friendlies' feet, and of course they have left us out to dry, justifiably so, because our friendlies at the UN were, they're very friendly to us because they know we're on the side of, trying to mark change in the United States, but we are not being looked at in any favorable measure like we used to, and if anything, there's more disdain than anything. So that's going to have to be a course correction that we'll have to deal with.
Yeah, if I can, what you just said made me think, thinking about what comes next. Um, one of the turns of phrase Senator Warren used to, would use that really stuck with me is personnel is policy.
Right,
And when thinking about the janitorial, a lot of it's going to be filling roles.
right,
So perhaps, as part of your guy, just I don't, perhaps you've already engaged in this exercise or done it, but now think about, 2.5 years from now, assuming we have a change in administration, that who is it, who would you like to see in some of these roles, right? In whatever agencies you're working at, like there is going to be a churn, and there is going to be a real, like, whatever, whoever comes in next is going to probably want to install their, as many of their own people as possible. So if you have a position where you could say, hey, I'm gonna make it real easy for you. Here's a great person, or here's a list of 4 people who would be phenomenal for that role. So you can, this is just kind of, as a lobbyist, I always thought it was my job to make it easy for my allies to do what I want them to do.
right.
And by kind of providing that lane and just being ready, so that way, if and when the time comes, you can think of that tactic. Hey, here are the 4 you just found out they're looking to fill positions. You're Johnny on the spot coming up. you're coming in, you're a longtime credible actor, you have a little shtick about why it is you are and why it is this person's going to be able to hit the ground running and make it easier for the hiring team to just, yep, we got someone, they're going to do great, boom. So just throwing that out there, that I thought of that when you were talking about the janitorial aspect.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot to clean up, you know. That's exactly one of the things we want to see. We want to see our regular people that we deal with in the Justice Department, the International Narcotics and Law Enforcement there, right? We want to see our regulars that we have because Justin, just to be frank here, the people that we were talking to at all those organizations, including the ONDCP, have all gone dark since the recent president has been elected, whereas prior we had open dialogue and understanding and confirmations, and we missed those, and we're going to have to redo those bridges. But we're here to do that. We're going to continue to do that. That's what we're here about doing, is working together to bring about the change we want to see. Michael Krowitz.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. It's opened up my brain to thinking about something I haven't really thought about in this context. But part of that, I just want to throw this out there. Part of that housekeeping, that janitorial work, and I think it's a great suggestion for Veterans Action Council to be kind of looking forward and trying to figure out, who we can put where. But it's more than just who we can put where. I think our drug policy reform movement has dropped the ball to a great extent at the very highest levels in the very broadest coalitions and biggest tents, because we've never really addressed, we've addressed the criminal justice aspects of the big anti-drug abuse acts. And when for those who are historians in the room, the big anti-drug abuse acts go back like to the mid 90s, and they created the drug czar's office, for example, itself. They created the high intensity drug trafficking area grant system itself. And hidden, or I say hidden, it's right there in plain sight, but we don't talk about it very often. I don't know very many cannabis activists that I've ever heard talk about it, but right there in the high intensity drug trafficking area grant system, which is, dedicated towards trafficking and drug interdiction, but embedded in that is funding for anti-drug coalitions.
Yeah.
That basically, Kevin Sabet and Kevin Sabet's ilk are getting funding from the federal government through high intensity drug trafficking area grant programs that need to be shut down. We shut down DARE a long time ago, but we've never focused on this and shut this stuff down. And they get a huge amount of funding with almost no regard for whether that funding is actually productive in reducing youthful experimentation or drug abuse, or we've had to fight against these people in many cases to implement harm reduction and even just harm reduction theoretically, let alone funding it and making it work. Just the wording on a resolution gets their ire, or at least did for many years. So anyway, I just want to throw that on the table, that we should be digging into the federal system. We've been looking at, Veterans Action Council has been looking at sort of the conversation that happens after legalization, like what happens next, international conversations. If we deschedule, for example, there's no discussion about, oh, should we withdraw from the treaty? Should we try to, reapply to the treaty with reservations? Should we just say fuck it and walk away from the treaty? I mean, these are actually thoughts we probably should have before we get to that bridge, before we blow the bridge up. Maybe we should talk about it first. So, but anyway, that's just as an example. I think this is along the same line, that we should be digging into this. The drug czar's office had always struck me as funny, and we have had to get around this fact. When they wrote that law and created it's called the Office of National Drug Control Policy, what we hatingly call the drug czar's office. That office actually, by law, is not allowed to discuss legalization. It's written right into the act. So this is a biased agency that's given roles that in some cases are intended to be unbiased and intended to be public health oriented or evidence based. So
It's
anyway,
just
I just want to throw that on the table. Yeah.
It's like NIDA, only on drug abuse, not on drug use.
No, Michael, you're absolutely, it's by law. They're not even allowed to consider. incorporating aspects that talk about the positives of drug use. And I think, this is something I would talk with Paul Armentano at NORML a lot about over the years when I was there, and really appreciate it. He was the only person, that from the NORML space that talked to me about HIDA as well. Um, no, and I think with ONDCP, it's kind of analogous to the fight that we're seeing about ICE right now, like Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Like, it's only been around as an entity for 20 years, or 20, just over 20 years for ICE. But now it's already like, so, and I remember people on the quote unquote left who were calling for its abolition 10 years ago, were being regarded as kooks. And they're like, no, this organization is only 10 years old. For decades and decades and decades, we had other programs like, and it was, forgetting the acronym of what it used to be, but where before they combined immigration and enforcement in the same division, and had the application and the gun in the same place. So I don't know. I mean, maybe you could go a whole like, hey, we're running a $2 trillion a year deficit, and this is about reducing government waste, and look at all of these failures that politicians have got, from decades ago past, just to pat themselves on the back and say, hey, we're addressing drug problems. Now these programs aren't working. Make them justify their utility. They're not going to. And this is how we're going to address the deficit. I mean, they talk about how we had to cut PBS. Like, get rid of them too. And bring
Yeah,
back people.
we got a lot of work to do still, but that's okay. We're not afraid of the work,
I'm,
But
I will say, as part of, if I may interrupt, part of eating my Wheaties for this conversation, if you will, I was listening to a Ken Burns interview recently, because he's promoting his new documentary on the American Revolution, and talking about how we're the great experiment, and how novel the concept of a free people was 250 years ago. And you guys, I wish that you guys had the ability to be heard more effectively, but you're slowly doing it, and I'm always game to scheme. If you guys think me being a sounding board for you guys would be helpful, I'm only a phone call away.
well, and we meet regularly, so come and
Yeah.
join us. We'd love to you have a valuable voice. It's still very valuable, and we can't thank you enough for joining us tonight again, for another fascinating conversation. See, we almost went another 2 hours here, just in conversations, and we wrapped through those questions pretty quick, but there's so many layers to this onion, right? And we touched on many, but there's still many we could go on. So don't be surprised. We'll be calling you back in the future.
Oh,
So,
but yeah, just because we're done does anybody else have anything else? Did I inspire another idea you wanna chat about right now, or should we call it now?
we'll probably wrap it up. We've been going a while here, but at the same time, I don't have any other questions at this time. And we really think about our questions. And as you saw from the questions we
Great.
brought forward, we don't want to just ask the normal questions. We want to ask the ones that nobody's really asking, and get it from those people who know what they're talking about. So we'll be calling you in the future. And we didn't even touch about the CBD stuff that we uncovered at the UN. Well, that we were the ones to announce, which, fuck it, we'll just keep it going here. So we, in our own side event, announced to the world that CBD is legal. And why has the International Narcotics Control Board decided to do so was a very interesting situation. They did what's called a teleological reevaluation of the treaty. And first, originally, CBD, of course, was an extract of cannabis. So therefore, boogity, 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 bad stuff. Can't be fucking with it, right? Well, the UN then looked at it and decided, well, not only is it non-psychoactive, it's decided that it has to be considered an abuse potential, right? And from their look, it lacks abuse potential in terms of the single convention drug treaty. And because of that, they have decided and put out a memo, and that memo was put out in 2024 to all governments. It's called a circular letter. And we got a copy of that circular letter. Because the INCB wouldn't provide it to us, but we have, you said how we build our momentum. Well, we found a friendly country who provided us a copy of it. Well, there's two parts. The first part, the teleological, why they decided to do the teleological, is a missing piece of the puzzle. We're still trying to find out that piece. However, the other piece was an attachment, because cannabis are an attachment to the circular letters. They're not actually part of the circular letter. They're an addendum. Okay, well, this addendum basically states that from the treaty standpoint, CBD is legal worldwide. And on top of that, the INCB has decided that, you know what? We're not even going to regulate the THC content. We're going to let the member states decide what that should be. So that's the interesting twist that we made. Our friends, we're talking with Canra and other people, and made them aware is that guess what? You now have a problem that you're going to have to be the people to solve this conundrum because previously it has been left to the French EU .03 seed, which is something I lobbied against back in 1995. Unfortunately, that's how long I've been doing this shit. But at the same time, this is the first time we've seen an international body go, fuck you to the EU seed, which it's a chef's kiss for me. Don't get me wrong. It's a little deep-seated hate that has welled up in me for a long time. So to see it actually come from, the UN's overseeing bodies, that was refreshing. But at the same time, when we presented it to Canra, it's a new conundrum because now each country has to decide on what THC limit will be for their CBD plants. So it no longer falls under the control of the treaty, just for the fact that it lacks abuse potential, which is rather a fascinating twist, given because people have this, this we were discussing about it because was it because people have found CBD be intoxicating, so we thought maybe it was the intoxicating thing, but no, it's the lax abuse potential that seems to be the underlying use of language here. So I'm curious what your thoughts on, since I'm breaking this to you, what
Yeah,
your thoughts
dude.
on that are, because you also understand the depth of the conundrum that the hemp bill has been, much less what this new twist now will allow because there's also, just to caveat this, there's something happening next week where the FDA is going to make a ruling on CBD. So we're very curious if this has to do with this circular letter.
So that's, as the dude would say, that's fucking interesting, man. Like, that's yeah, Mike, I saw your shirt too. I was like, I'm gonna see if I can if I can appropriately hit a reference. That's fucking interesting, man. The first thought that comes to my mind is if every country is now being told that they should come up with their own determination, like other than the United States, who in the world are looked to as a leading authority that might, like, hey, if it's, I'm just getting pulls out of my butt. Like if it's Britain, let's call, let's figure out, let's make some British friends and make sure that they hear from you guys and learn from your successes and learn from the things that you feel didn't work and really push, let's say, all right, we're gonna make the world great by making Britain's policy better. Like, because America's lost its leadership stature, right, in this space. So I don't know. So yeah, I asked a question and I didn't let you answer it. Who in the world would be like a reputable country for this?
Canada, they have a robust hemp market. I buy and own hemp seed oil all the time from them. So they have been doing at least the hemp from the traditional hemp sense, right? You could
Yeah.
look, of course, to the Czech Republic. You could look to, the Eastern Bloc countries where I used to actually produce my hemp back in the 90s. That's where I instinctively go, of course. But there's, other companies that have, come forward. You could look at the Netherlands and look at what our friend Ben Dronkers has done, Michael Krawitz.
Right, Israel.
Yep.
Yeah, there's one little caveat that I'll add to that whole mix of what Etienne said. Um, the International Narcotics Control Board recognized that THC was necessary in having a good CBD product. And I think that's really interesting because at the very same time, in this last couple of weeks, CANRA released its own white paper on what it called full spectrum CBD products, where it made essentially the same argument and opined at the difficulty this presents for regulation. And I second that difficulty for regulation because the open question basically is, what does uncontrolled or not treaty controlled, what does that mean in terms of regulation around the world? And like you pointed out, who's going to lead on this, and how would they lead? What's really fascinating is we have a friend over in Barcelona, Kenzie Ribulet, and he wrote a paper called High Compliance: How to Legalize Cannabis Within the Drug Control Treaty, in compliance with the Drug Control Treaty. And what he opined, after very carefully studying the treaty, was that there were exemptions in the treaty that could be applied to adult rec cannabis, even THC rich cannabis, as long as it was a good faith effort and that there were accommodations made in that good faith effort for safety, public safety and health and well-being, etc. And what we have now, we have two new interpretations of the treaty by the International Narcotics Control Board. And in short, they've agreed with everything Kenzie said except for one thing, which is just the amount of THC. And they've left it open. They're looking at very low THC. There's no reason why the exemptions couldn't be applied to any level of THC once you actually understand the treaty, actually understand the issues in the law. But setting that aside, what the International Narcotics Control Board has said is that cannabis can be treated as an exempt product, and that exempt product could cover THC that accommodates the CBD, that member states will have to figure out how much THC is appropriate, and in good faith, quote, in good faith, come up with that limit. Again, the only thing at this point that they're quibbling with Kenzie on is the amount of THC. And I'll quote Kenzie here. No one should be imprisoned for an interpretation.
I love it. Oh God. Yes, I just pulled up this paper as you were talking about it, and I'm looking forward just to, I'm scrolling through the executive summary right now, and thank you for bringing this up. I'm curious to read it. Yeah, that's fucking interesting, man. Like, I keep on having to quote the dude. Yeah,
Well, let
like,
me say one more thing, and
well,
that is
so
when Kenzie put this forward, he got yelled at by the movement thinkers, by the legal scholars in our not the cannabis movement, but the drug policy reform movement. Legal
yeah.
scholars yelled at him as if what he said was blasphemy. But again, the INCB has come full circle on, I would say, over 90% of Kenzie's thesis.
No, I think what from my own very narrow experience, principally what's coming to my mind thinking about this kind of where do you draw the lines, is thinking about the bad faith efforts to restrict percentages in oil, right? And like, oh, they want to put like a 92% cap, right? It's like, okay, well, if I agree to that, then like who's to stop them from trying to criminalize 90% versus criminalize 85%? And like, almost like free speech, like I have to be an absolutist, but like also like I have to be I'm not going to spend my time frustrated that it's illegal to yell fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire, right? So it's yeah, that's the challenge of trying to build a consensus. Yeah, I mean, if Canada's your best bet, shoot your shot there. I mean, yeah, they're the new leaders of the North American hemisphere. Like, and they got a mature adult use market. They can point to years of experience of having a countrywide legalization. Justin Trudeau's quote of Al Capone would have loved it if alcohol was only decriminalized. Which he got from a member of NORML Canada back when he was just a lowly MP before he became PM. Yeah, if Canada's your shot, shoot your shot. I think that's awesome. But yeah, I'm glad that I don't have to work on that issue. That's tough. That's tough.
Right? Isn't that
Yes,
just the
like, that's tough.
Let
it's
me
a,
let me let me say one more little thing. To be clear, Veterans Action Council is not trying to expand the CBD rule of INCB to drive the Mack truck of legalization through it. Just to be clear, we're not trying to do that. We're not even thinking about doing that.
Yeah.
But we're looking at the law, and it says what it says. What we're looking at, which is we think the greater issue, is how do we allow for international trade of medicinal cannabis products when the models that we see emerging are what we would have to call neo-colonial models.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, like yeah,
It's
yeah.
one that it's hard to wrap your head around it. I know
You know, I,
it's a
I
thinker.
remember, like for me, I felt, one of my jokes would be, Michael, I might have used this line with you in the past, but I always enjoyed our conversations about international versus national priorities. But like, two of the jokes I used to make about Normal's name is, one, it says national on my door, not international, and two, it says marijuana, not mushrooms, right? And that was like my, like, get out of conversation free card if I didn't want to have it. Um I mean, just thinking about the difficulties of navigating the conversations about interstate commerce about legal cannabis, right? And how do you rank these different fiefdoms that have set up, and all these different, and if we want commonality and parity amongst regulatory regimes, are we expecting states to regulate to the bottom or to the top, or what's a healthy middle, and how do you do that, and like, how would it be fair to, I love drinking Oregon Pinot Noir, right? I love Oregon Pinot Noir. I like cannabis grown outdoors in Oregon as well. I would like to be able to get that here in Ohio. I can't. And like, just trying to, like, circle those squares on an international, your patience to put up with that is commendable.
Well, what we what
It's
we
tough.
what we found is the U.S. has a greater influence on the rest of the world than we thought.
Yeah.
For example, the boats that are being blown up just outside of Venezuela, some of them at least have marijuana, not cocaine, that they're carrying. So that puts some pretty high stakes on moving marijuana around the world if it's still considered illegal. And remember what I said about how we could conceivably in the United States deschedule cannabis by a legislative action in Congress, and at the same time stay in the treaty. And I didn't say this before, but it's conceivable that we could even give still favored nation status to those countries that have an eradication program. So
Yep.
still adversely affecting the rest of the world while promoting our own. It's mind bending. Let me give you an insight. This was Saint Vincent down there in the Caribbean. This is the government of St. Vincent speaking on the microphone. I believe it was the finance director, secretary of the federal government there, and he was speaking at this open forum. And he said that the United States was brilliant having Schedule One. And of course, opening with that got my attention. Like, how is the U.S.? Tell me how the U.S. is brilliant. I hate Schedule One. Tell me how it's brilliant. But he said that what it's done is it's created all these little experiments in all these states and prevented any input from the Caribbean. We can't send our cannabis there, but they can do all this stuff with cannabis and profit from it and keep us out of the market. And that's their perspective. Obviously, that's their perspective. That's what he said on the microphone. That's what was pressing on his mind. I think it gives you a very different perspective on, the U.S. markets. And of course, the banking issue is not just a U.S. issue; it's a world issue. U.S. has a great deal of world banking that we goes through here or is connected to it. So all these issues seem to be whole. And if that isn't bad enough, we have an industry that's being held back, with ankle weights here in the United States. But where are they going? Because Veterans Action Council has looked into this, and basically, there is a path internationally for commerce in medical cannabis. It's a little difficult because of the treaty issues of cannabis that you don't have to deal with the other 1,000 traditional medicinal herbs. But nonetheless, it has a future. It has a path. Once the U.S. gets its feet out of the middle of it, there should be a way for you to get not just Oregon cannabis, but how about Hindu Kush and maybe some Thai side by side with that nice Oregon outdoor and the Pinot Noir. So I think that's a beautiful future. But what does the adult rec have as its future? And adult rec has been able to come in sort of with medical because the nearsightedness of Schedule One, shitty Schedule One, has made the U.S. federal government colorblind to whether it's medical or not. But we have looked into it and see no reason why that colorblindness won't almost immediately disappear upon the very day of a federal change in status, like descheduling, for example. So yeah, it's all super fascinating, and it all is sort of next level, like what happens after, and not how do we legalize it, but what happens after we legalize it? How is that gonna look, and how can we start working on that now? I think that's been the more interesting thing that we've been trying to get our brain around.
It's a lot. Yeah, that that's a lot. Yeah. All right. Well, I really look forward to reading this paper and seeing and I'm
Hey, give us any thoughts you have. Very
yeah,
interested in any reaction you have to that.
you got it. No, sounds great. No, thank you again for the opportunity. I will just say, like, we first talked about me joining you guys now because I was, in the process of running for local office here in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. I was running for a county position, and I was gonna, I asked around and nobody else had raised their hands that they were gonna take on the incumbent. And I was like, well, my incumbent deserves a challenge. And I think I do him a lot better than him. But then two other people had the same idea and jumped into the race. And I'm like, oh, in a four-way race with the one entrenched 30-year politician incumbent who's got $100,000 in the bank, like this math isn't mathing. I don't see a path for any challenger if all three of us stay in. So I dropped out, but I really appreciate you guys still having me come on and talk about this and yeah, no, that blew my hair back a bit. So I'm gonna have to I'm gonna even though I'm out, you keep bringing me back. Yeah, I'm gonna
They're
that's gonna
pulling you back in. I know. And that's why I was saying, come join us for more
yeah,
conversations. We meet regularly on Mondays and Wednesdays, and we're always happy to have your thoughts and insights. You may call yourself retired and out. However, you were like, well, do we still want to have this conversation? Look, we went 2 hours, right?
sure.
So,
I know I really gotta pee. Like I have the
Uh,
bathroom. Like I'd be
we
like, I don't want to end it, but I really have to pee now.
yeah, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. But we're gonna probably invite you back in the future for future conversations because you still are well versed as well as you have a knowledgeable history and you're not dead. So, we're gonna continue to poke that bear. Even though you are in Ohio, we may rely on you from some Ohio news because we know there's things happening there.
I will. Okay, so when I moved back home, I didn't want to be like the weed guy, the weed policy guy. When I came back, and I worked on some labor issues, I helped get some wage theft policies passed in a couple localities. But I will say for any Ohio members you have, now keep your weed in your trunk. And if you have cannabis in a bag that is not from a dispensary, they are going to assume that you're bringing it in from Michigan or another state. So the, if you, because it has to be an original packaging now. So, but if you grow your own cannabis, which at the time being is still legal here in Ohio, the Ziploc bag you put it in after you dried your own homegrown is its original packaging. So if you have something that's not from a Ohio dispensary, it's a crime now. And they just put, they're trying to recriminalize it in a way, and with the dispensaries and with the industry's blessing, because the industry is like, wow, well, why aren't we profiting more? And it's a cavalcade of factors. Anyway, neither here nor there. Yes, I know just enough to be dangerous about Ohio. But
Well,
thank you.
still more than we know.
Yeah.
All right.
Just thank you guys for all you guys do, and to build the community, to keep the drumbeat alive, to keep the advocacy going. It's so important, and I'm so grateful to see that you guys are still doing it, and
Oh, we're gonna, yeah, mate,
really enjoy the conversation.
we'll do it till we die. We're the dedicated. So, that's one of the things is that we've been doing it for a while. It's just not gonna stop for us. It's just Mike.
I got to lay down one little factoid before we split, and that is the document in your hand, high compliance, while it's very interesting, don't get too caught up in it because it's not the main attraction. I mean, it's for us, it's an important, reading matter that, it's required reading, you might say. But the real interesting stuff is actually not in Vienna at all. It's in Geneva, and it's under World Intellectual Property Organization instead of under the World, Drug Control System. And it has to do with, the benefit sharing and profit sharing around genetics and genetic resources, protecting those genetic resources and bringing them to market. And we're already trying to figure out how to bring back some of the world's best bud that's been crushed by prohibition, and not just bring it back, but have a path to market where the source country is proud of it, and the world gets to see what this complementary benefit is of having access to these world-renowned, old landrace, cannabis varietals.
Yeah. Well, first, I will say I love that their acronym is WIPO.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just fun. That's just a fun acronym to say. I just pulled it up, and no, they are all right. Well, this you have
yeah.
to.
It's neat stuff. So yeah, we're trying to figure out how to navigate this and make sure that Rastafari in Jamaica, can get to market with their fantastic bud. That they're not caged out by standards that are created that may include irradiation or other bullshit from our modern cannabis industry. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and I just wanted you to not get too caught up in the detail of the treaties, because we feel like the treaty is pretty much behind us. We've got the treaty open, where the only thing we can change now with the treaty with regard to cannabis is removing it and actually rewriting the treaty. And we'll do that at some day, but we don't need to do it now to have a robust medicinal cannabis access. But we do need to get the United States evidently reformed. Now it's become a world priority to get cannabis reform at the national level in the U.S. That shows you how much my tone and my language has changed.
Quite a big change since we first met now, nearly a decade ago. Uh,
The
Great.
times they are. Yeah.
And on that note, I really do have to pee, so I'm
All
gonna go.
right. Well, we'll
Okay,
wrap it
Thank
up
you,
then.
thank you all. I appreciate you
Love
immensely.
you. So, everybody, this has been our VAC Roundtable. Justin Strekal, VAC Roundtable 99. I'd like to thank our council members Michael Kraus, Leslie Fries, Doc Lang, Knight Landau, Mary Lynn Mathry, Mike D, and of course, I'm your host, Etienne Fontan. And that was Justin Strekal running to the bathroom for relief. So, we love you, Justin, and we'll talk to you soon. Till next time, everybody, y'all have a great rest of your day.